Montana Territory, October 1877. The stagecoach door flew open with a crack louder than thunder, and Lark Ashford hit the hard-packed earth like a sack of flour tossed from a barn loft. Zane Vexler had been fixing the back fence when he heard the commotion. He dropped his hammer and ran toward the road, boots pounding over frost-stiff grass. The coach driver was already yelling at the woman on the ground. "I said get off. You lied, and I do not haul liars." Zane reached the road just as the driver climbed back onto the coach. The horses were twitchy, nostrils flaring in the cold morning air. The man didn't look back as he cracked the reins and the coach rolled on, wheels thumping over ruts. Lark was still sitting in the dirt, skirt torn at the hem, bonnet askew. Her pale blue traveling dress was covered in dust, and her gloved hands trembled as she tried to push herself upright. She looked too stunned to speak. Zane stepped in front of her. "Miss, are you hurt?" She blinked up at him, eyes wide and green like pine needles in winter. I do not think so." Her voice was soft, clipped with a refined accent that did not belong out here. "He said I misled him, that I gave a false name." Zane crouched down beside her. "You did not." "No. The man I was to marry, he never showed in Dry Creek. When I asked for him at the post, they said he died last month of fever. The driver got angry when I asked to go on toward Billings. He said I was a burden." Her jaw tightened. "He threw me off." Zane stood and offered a hand. "You will not stay out here, not like this." She hesitated, then placed her hand in his. He pulled her to her feet, steadying her gently. She was taller than he expected, but she leaned slightly like the fall jarred her. "I have a cabin just a ways up," he said. "Come warm up. You can figure what to do next from there." Lark looked down the empty road, then back at him. "Thank you." They walked in silence through stiff grass and pine needles, her steps careful, his steady. Zane opened the cabin door and held it for her. Inside, it smelled of pine smoke and bread. The fire was still going strong in the stone hearth. "You can sit," he said, motioning to the chair by the fire. "I will get you something hot." She lowered herself into the chair with the grace of someone who had grown up sitting straight. She pulled off her gloves, revealing scraped knuckles. As he poured hot coffee into a tin cup, he noticed her watching him with curious eyes. "You live here alone?" she asked. He nodded. "Yes, ma'am." "No wife?" "No. I came here with my brother after the war. He died 4 winters ago. Been me in the land ever since." She nodded slowly. "I am sorry." Zane handed her the coffee. Her fingers wrapped around the cup and she let out a long breath. "I was supposed to marry a man named Everett Mallory," she said. "We wrote letters for months. He sent for me. I left everything, my work, my family. I believed there was a life waiting for me." Zane leaned against the table. "You are not going back?" Lark stared into the fire. "There is nothing to go back to. My father died last year. My mother remarried and moved to St. Louis. I was living in a boarding house in Baltimore, teaching piano. But that was not a life. Not really." Zane spoke softly. "You were looking for something real." Her eyes lifted to his. "Yes." He nodded once. "Then you found the right country." The wind rattled the shutters. Lark sipped the coffee slowly, then set the cup down. "I do not want to be a burden." "You are not," Zane said. "No one who gets thrown from a stagecoach should be out there alone." She smiled slightly, tired but genuine. He fixed her a plate cornbread, smoked venison, and beans. She ate slowly, carefully, but finished every bite. When she was done, she looked up. "Thank you for inviting me in." Zane met her eyes. "You can stay as long as you need." He meant it. There was something about her calmness, her dignity even in the middle of disaster. She was not fragile, just lost. That night, after she had settled on the cot near the fire, he sat at the table and watched the flames. She had fallen asleep quickly, hands folded beneath her cheek like a child. Zane could not explain the weight that settled in his chest then. It was not worry. It was something warmer. He had not expected anyone, let alone someone like her, strong, quiet, and still hopeful. In the morning, she was in the yard feeding scraps to the hens, apron tied neatly around her waist. "You did not have to do that," Zane said as he stepped outside. "I needed to move." "And they looked hungry." He smiled. "They always look hungry." She turned toward him. "I would like to earn my keep, until I can make a plan." "You are welcome to," he said. "But you do not have to." "I want to." And so she stayed. She swept the porch, washed their dishes, and mended the torn curtain by the window. She asked about his land, and he told her how he had cleared the trees by hand, how the frost came early in the fall and left late in the spring. They spoke quietly, sometimes not at all. But Zane found himself noticing everything: how she tilted her head when reading one of his old dime novels, how she laughed softly when the rooster chased a squirrel off the fence. One night, after supper, she looked up from her book and said, "What made you stay here?" "After your brother passed?" Zane stared into the fire. "I did not want to leave what we built. He is buried on the ridge. Feels like leaving would be giving up." She nodded. "That is a good reason." He looked at her. "What about you? Why did you really come out here?" Her fingers curled around the edge of the blanket. "I wanted someone to see me, not just as a teacher or a daughter or a charity case. I wanted to be chosen." Zane's voice was quiet. "You deserve that." She looked at him for a long moment. "So do you." The silence between them was not heavy. It was full. Something was changing. Neither of them said the word for it, but it was there, in the way she poured his coffee before he came in from the cold, in the way he built her a small shelf for her books without her asking. 1 week turned into 2. Then one night, as the snow began to fall outside, Lark stood by the fire brushing out her hair. Zane watched her from the table. "You could stay, Lark." She turned, eyes shining. "I am staying." He stood and crossed the room slowly, carefully. "Not just until spring. I mean, stay." "I know what you mean." He reached out and tucked a strand of her hair behind her ear. "Do you want to?" She pressed her hand gently to his chest. "Yes." And when he kissed her, it was quiet, certain, and full of everything they had not needed to say. The snow deepened in the creases of the valley, blanketing the pine boughs and muting the world outside the cabin. Zane's horses moved slow in the pasture, steam rising from their backs as they nosed through drifts for leftover grass. Lark stood at the window, sleeves rolled, drying her hands on a flour sack towel. Her gaze lingered on the slope beyond the barn, where a young buck had crossed through at dawn. Zane was shaping a new handle for the axe by the hearth, his knife gliding steadily along the grain. He paused when she turned from the window. "I've been thinking," she said, "about what I might do come spring. I'd like to start a small schoolhouse. For the children near enough to reach it." He set the knife aside. "There's a family with 2 girls down the ridge. The mother's part crow, quiet woman, but kind. They could use a teacher. I'd like to meet them when the weather eases." "You will." She drew her shawl tighter around her shoulders. "Did you ever want children?" Zane's fingers curved around the wood again, but he didn't pick up the knife. "When I was younger, I thought I'd have a boy, raise him honest, teach him the land. But not anymore? I don't know. I stopped thinking about things I couldn't have." Her voice was steady. "You could still have them." He looked up. She hadn't sat down. Her hand rested on the back of the chair, knuckles pale against the wool. "You figure you want a schoolhouse and a child?" he asked. "I think I want a home that's more than shelter," she said, "and a life that's more than waiting for someone else's plans to come true." Zane stood and crossed to her. He didn't touch her yet. "You want that with me?" "I do." He reached for her hand, calloused fingers brushing her wrist. "Then we'll build it. Whatever it takes." Later that week, they rode out to the ridge to visit the family he'd mentioned. The trail was narrow, flanked by stands of lodgepole pine. Lark rode behind him on the mule, arms wrapped around his waist, her breath warm against his collar. The homestead was small, tucked into the trees with smoke curling from the stovepipe. A girl with 2 neat braids opened the door, then ran back inside calling out in a language Lark didn't recognize but Zane did. A woman stepped out, wrapped in a blanket woven with blue and red stripes. Her eyes moved from Zane to Lark and back. "This is Lark," Zane said. "She wants to teach." The woman nodded once. "I'm Atsa. My girls are Nellie and Waya." Lark dismounted and stepped forward. "It's a pleasure." Atsa studied her a moment longer, then tilted her head toward the cabin. "Come in. You'll freeze out here." Inside, the space was warm and smelled of roasted squash. The girls sat cross-legged near the fire, stringing beads on a length of sinew. Atsa poured tea and sat across from Lark. "You're not from here," she said. "No, you speak careful. Like someone who's been told to." Lark blinked. "I suppose that's true." Atsa's eyes softened. "I've taught my daughters both tongues. They'll need them. You teach more than letters." "I hope to, but I'll start with letters." The older girl looked up. "Can I learn to read like the preacher's boy?" Lark smiled. "Yes, better even." When they left, Atsa walked them to the edge of the clearing. "You come back," she said. "We'll trade eggs for books." On the ride home, Lark rested her cheek against Zane's back. That felt like a beginning. It was. That night, he carved her name into the edge of the table beside his brother's. Just the first letter, but it was enough for now. The next morning, she stepped outside with a pair of linen skirts she'd soaked overnight. The sky was clear, sun glinting off snow, and the air had a bite that warned of another storm. She glanced toward the barn and saw Zane with his arms full of timber, piling it near the old coop. "What's that for?" she called. He looked up. "If you're starting a school, you'll need a place to teach." Her breath caught. "You'd build that here?" He shrugged, eyes steady. "You said you're staying." She crossed the yard, skirts stiff with ice, and wrapped her arms around his waist. "I meant it," she whispered. He leaned down, his lips brushing her hair. "So did I." They stood like that while the wind picked up again, and the sky began to shift from blue to pewter. But the cold didn't reach them. Not anymore. By early March, the snow began to loosen its grip. The ridge ran silver with meltwater, and the soil turned dark and rich beneath Zane's boots. Lark had taken to wearing one of his flannel shirts over her dress in the mornings, sleeves rolled to her elbows as she worked beside him, helping clear the plot near the chicken coop where the foundation for the schoolhouse would rise. They broke ground with a borrowed spade and a wooden frame Zane had shaped the week before. Lark knelt beside the raw earth, pressing her hand to the soil. "It's warmer than I expected," she said. "This land's been waiting for something." Zane leaned on the shovel. "It has." She looked up at him, hair tumbling loose from its pins. "You ever think about where your people came from before the war?" "Before Montana." "Ohio," he said. "A tobacco farm. My father drank himself into the ground before I was 15, and my mother died birthing my brother. I left as soon as I could carry a pack." Lark brushed dirt from her palms. "You never wanted to go back?" "There was nothing there worth turning around for." She nodded, quiet a moment. "My father was a printer. He kept his press in the basement and printed abolitionist tracts all through the war. There were nights when men with torches stood outside our stoop. I used to think bravery was louder than fear. But Papa, he never raised his voice." Zane stepped closer, his hand resting lightly against her back. "He raised a daughter who crossed half the country on her own. That says plenty." That evening, while Zane mended a broken yoke, Lark sat at the table sketching a rough plan for the schoolhouse. She had measured the space twice, marked where the windows would go, and drafted a list of supplies they'd need: chalk, slate, a water bucket, and a stove if they could find one second-hand. She tapped the pencil against the table. "What are the chances we'd find old desks anywhere nearby?" Zane didn't look up from the yoke. "Might be some in the trading post up in Livingston. Or we could build benches. I think benches would suit better anyway." "You think you'd ride to Livingston with me come the thaw?" "I would. I've never seen the Yellowstone. You'll like it. River's wide and moves like it remembers something." She folded the paper and tucked it into the ledger. "You talk about the land like it's alive." He set the yoke down and wiped his hands on a rag. "Because it is. The days grew longer, and with them came the first signs of green shoots pushing through near the creek, birds returning in pairs to the trees behind the barn. Lark began walking the ridge path in the early hours, sketchbook in hand, collecting pressed leaves and noting the calls of birds she didn't yet recognize. One afternoon, she returned with something wrapped in a shawl. Zane met her at the cabin steps, brow lifted. "I found her near the creek," Lark said, revealing a limp brown rabbit with a bloodied hind leg. "Trapwire. She's breathing, but she won't last the night without help." Zane crouched to study it. "That's no wild snare. Someone set it too close to the property line. She was calling. I couldn't leave her." He took the rabbit from her carefully. "I'll heat water. You clean the wound. She'll fight you, but don't let her." They worked in tandem as they always did now. Lark boiled cloths and gently cleaned the gash while Zane held the rabbit still. They wrapped the leg, tucked her in a crate lined with wool, and placed it near the hearth. "She'll need feeding," Zane murmured. "I'll make a mash of oats and milk. If she pulls through, we'll let her go. She won't forget you." Lark brushed a strand of hair back from her cheek. "I don't need her to remember. I just want her to live." Spring edged closer with each passing day. The schoolhouse walls rose, slow but steady, with lumber Zane hauled in from a sawmill 2 ridges north. Lark laid out the interior, measuring space between slates and windows, always with her eyes on the light. One evening, after the rafters were set, she stood alone in the doorway, watching the sun dip low behind the hills. Zane came up behind her, his hands dusted with sawdust, shirt damp at the collar. "Thinking about your first lesson?" he asked. She didn't turn. "Thinking about what it means to build something that will outlast us." He stepped beside her. "That's what makes it worth doing." She turned to him then, her hand resting on his chest. "I didn't come here to be someone's sorrow or second chance. I came here hoping someone might see me as worth the keeping." "I do," he said. "You've made a place here. One I didn't know I needed." She smiled, faint and sure. "Then let's make it a life." They sealed it not with words but with the way their foreheads touched, breath shared in the gold hush of evening. 2 days later, the rabbit limped free into the woods beyond the pasture, pausing once beneath a pine before disappearing into the underbrush. Lark watched her go, arms folded, no sadness in her face. Only stillness. Behind her, Zane was fitting the schoolhouse door into place, plane in hand. "We'll finish before the thaw's done," he called. She turned, sunlight catching the curve of her cheek. "We'll finish together." The first warm rain came in the night, tapping steady against the roof while Lark lay awake, pulse calm but full. She listened to the rhythm, one hand resting on Zane's chest, rising and falling beneath her palm. The sound of the rain didn't stir him. He slept like a man who trusted what he had. By morning, the road had softened enough to take the wagon out. Zane hitched the team before daylight, and Lark packed a bundle of dried apples, cornmeal, and the last of the cured pork. She tied her hair back with a length of cotton she'd dyed herself with sumac berries, a deep rust color that matched the iron-rich clay near the creek. They set out after oats were fed and the barn door secured. Zane took the reins and Lark sat close beside him, wrapped in a wool blanket stitched with a faded star pattern. The sky was low and pewter-colored, but the air smelled of thawed earth and damp pine bark. They were headed for Livingston, a full day's ride north if the river crossings held. Mid-morning, when they passed the burned-out homestead near Elk's Bend, Lark turned toward him. "What happened here? Fire took it 3 years back. Widow tried to run it alone after her sons moved east. When the roof collapsed, she walked 2 days through snow to reach town. They say she never came back." Lark studied the blackened beams, now half sunk into the ground. "You ever think about what you'd do if the land turned on you?" Zane kept his eyes ahead. "It won't. But if it did?" He was quiet for a moment. "Then I'd build again. Might take time, but I wouldn't leave." She nodded once and didn't press further. In Livingston, they traded beaver pelts for a cast-iron stove and a small crate of slates. Lark bartered for a sack of dried ink and a set of hand-bound primers, speaking with a clarity that made the shopkeeper stand straighter. Zane watched her from the back wall, where he examined rows of forged nails and a coil of hemp rope. There was a steadiness in her now that hadn't been there when she first stepped into his cabin, a bone-deep surety that she wasn't just adapting. She was belonging. As they loaded the wagon, a man with a drooping hat and a limp came toward them, his coat too fine for the muddy street. "You Vexler?" Zane turned. "Who's asking?" The man tilted his head. "Name's Merritt. I handle land filings for the territory office. Heard you've been building out past the South Ridge." Zane nodded once. "That's right. You got a claim filed on the parcel?" Zane's jaw tightened. "Was filed under my brother's name. He passed." Merritt scratched at his chin. "Then it's open again, technically. You'll want to refile, or someone with deeper pockets might beat you to it." Lark stepped forward. "What does it cost?" $15 to file, another $10 for the surveyor." Zane's shoulders stiffened. "We'll handle it." Merritt tipped his hat and walked off without waiting for thanks. Lark stood quiet for a moment, watching the man disappear into the crowd. Zane didn't look at her. "We'll make it work." She set her hand on his arm. "I have some money tucked away. From before. I don't want your savings going to fix a thing that should already be ours." "It's not fixing, Zane. It's building the life we said we'd make. I'd rather spend it here than let it sit in a drawer." He looked at her then, eyes steady. "You sure?" "I am." They filed the claim before noon, the papers signed with her hand over his, steady and deliberate. On the ride home, the rain returned, gentler than before. Lark rested her head against his shoulder, and he guided the horses through the rutted road, wheel-deep in mud. By the time they reached the cabin, the clouds had lifted just enough to let the last of the day's light spill across the mountains. Zane backed the wagon into the shed, and Lark carried the primers inside, stacking them carefully near the hearth. They ate late bread fried in bacon grease and canned peaches from the cellar. Afterward, she stood at the window watching the wind play through the willows. Zane came to stand behind her. "I didn't think I'd ever want more than quiet," he said. "But I do." She didn't turn. "What do you want?" He wrapped his arms around her waist, his chin resting against her shoulder. "A home that doesn't feel like waiting. A woman who stands beside me, not behind." Lark leaned into him, eyes still on the trees. "Then you have what you want." They stood like that long after the fire burned low, the scent of rain-dampened earth drifting in through the chinks in the window frame. The stove sat in its crate near the door, and the slates were lined up neatly, each one promising something clean and unspoiled. Outside, the soil was softening for seed. Inside, something deeper had already taken root. The stove was in place and burning clean by the second week of April, its belly fed with split pine that Zane chopped in the hours before dawn. Lark had swept the schoolhouse floor in long, careful strokes, the scent of fresh wood and warming iron curling up from the corners of the single-room structure. The benches were finished, sanded smooth, and oiled with linseed she'd bartered for in town. When the windows caught the light just right, the dust motes turned gold. She stood at the threshold now, thumb resting against the frame Zane had carved from juniper. He came up behind her without a word, his presence as familiar as the rise of wind before a storm. "I want to open it in 2 weeks," she said. His voice stayed low. "You'll be ready." "I think I already am." He set a folded paper in her hand. Letter came through the post. "From the territory office. You're listed now official as any schoolteacher in these parts." She unfolded the envelope carefully, her name spelled out in the looping hand of a clerk. "Lark Ashford, Educator, Southridge District." "I didn't think I'd ever see my name in print again," she said. He leaned against the doorway. "You earned it." She folded the paper and tucked it into her belt. "I want to go see Atsa. Let her know the date. I'll hitch the mule." The ridge trail had dried enough to ride by late morning. The mule picked its way along the edge, hooves sure on the packed earth. Lark rode alone this time, reins loose in her hands, while Zane walked beside, leading a second saddle slung with a bundle of seeds, pencils, and the spare primer. When the trees opened near Atsa's homestead, the girls were already outside, knee-deep in a patch of tilled soil. Waya spotted them first and waved, her hands stained dark from planting. Atsa met them at the fence, her eyes flicking from Zane to Lark and back. "You've come with news," she said. "The school opens in 2 weeks," Lark said. "I brought you the first primer." There's a story about a fox and a miller's boy I think Nelly will like. Atsa took the book and turned it over in her hand. Your voice has changed. Has it? You sound like someone who belongs to the land now. Not just passing through. Lark's throat tightened. I'd like to think so. Atsa's gaze softened. Then you should come back for dinner. The girls will want to show you their letters. They stayed until the moon rose low over the pines and the girls dozed curled together on a buffalo robe near the fire. Lark helped Atsa clean the bowls in silence until Zane's voice drifted in from outside. We should go before the ridge darkens. Atsa handed Lark a wrapped bundle. For your first day. Fry bread and sweet root won't spoil. Lark took it with both hands. Thank you. You're building more than a school, Atsa said. You're building memory. That stays longer than stone. The ride back was quiet, the sky a deep indigo. Lark kept the bundle in her lap, her other hand resting lightly on Zane's thigh. When they reached the cabin, he helped her down and lingered, one hand at the small of her back. I don't want to wait anymore, he said. Her breath caught. Wait for what? For the rest of it. For what it is to be your husband. Her hands slid up his chest, fingers resting just beneath his collar. Then ask me. He nodded once as if he'd already decided days ago. Will you marry me here, under the trees? With no preacher but the land to witness it. Yes, she said. That's all I ever wanted. They married the next morning beneath a weathered pine. Atsa standing beside them, her girls scattering sagebrush blossoms at their feet. The wind carried the scent of juniper and damp grass as they held hands. The vow simple and quiet. Zane tied a strip of red cloth around her wrist, a gesture he'd once seen among the northern Cheyenne of binding, of choosing. Lark pressed her forehead to his and whispered a promise back, not of obedience, but of steadiness. The school opened with 5 children and 2 goats that refused to stay outside. Lark laughed as Waya tried to shoo one out with a slate, her voice bright and certain. By midsummer, the benches were full. Some children came from as far as the trading post, riding with their fathers twice a week. Lark taught them letters and numbers, yes, but also how to listen for water underground, how to read weather in the clouds, how to stitch a torn hem so it held. Zane built a lean-to beside the school for firewood and tools, and some evenings he sat inside carving small toys for the younger ones, a fawn, a tiny canoe, a crow with spread wings. One evening, Lark found him waiting at the edge of the field, his shirt open at the throat, hands tucked in his pockets. I've been thinking, he said. Dangerous, she teased. He smiled. I'd like to raise a child here, if you're willing. She stepped close, fingers brushing his wrist. I am. And when autumn came and the first frost kissed the ridge, Lark stood in the doorway of the cabin, one hand resting low on her belly. Zane came up behind her, arms circling her waist. Feel that, she whispered. He placed his palm to her side. A tiny kick, sure and strong. Lark turned into him, her face tucked beneath his chin. We're not waiting anymore. No, he said. We're home. The wind swept through the trees, rustling branches like laughter. Behind them, the fire glowed steady. Ahead, the land stretched wide and open, not empty, but full of roots, of memory, of everything they had built together.